My name is Robert Landau. I'm originally from New York City. The people that boo always sit in the front row. But you know what, Wayne?
What?
Us New Yorkers can take it.
Good, good.
We've got a tough hide. That's right. And for many, many years, folks, I was an actor in New York City, and I was getting a little tired of the grind of what it is to be an actor in New York City. So I was looking for an alternative. To make a long story short, I found myself on a cruise ship sailing out of Fort Lauderdale, January 1st, 1983, as a socializer. Does anybody know what a socializer is on a cruise ship? Dances with all the single ladies. You know what? I thought you looked familiar. That's 100% correct. And that was my job. Did so with various amounts of success, ballroom dancing-wise, for about a year. Then became an assistant cruise director, then became a cruise director, and stayed a cruise director for close to 10 years in the cruise industry. Now, I am employed by the company that owns this wonderful community. The company is called Spectrum Retirement Communities, and we are based in Denver. My title is Vice President of Lifestyle Enhancement, which means, in these days of very posh titles, which means that I work with all of the activities directors at the over 15 communities that we have nationwide to get them to integrate programs such as this into their schedule, to give us a truly unique activity schedule that no other retirement community has. Today, it's my pleasure to present another Big Band All-Star Series presentation. And again, I'd very much like to thank you for coming. Here's the format of what we'll be doing together for the next, 50 minutes or less. I would say about 30 to 35 minutes of what I hope you will find to be well-researched information concerning the one and only Peggy Lee, because everybody knows the name Peggy Lee, and it goes without saying that I would suspect that everybody here knows something about Peggy Lee. Actually, we could keep the lights on until, thank you, know something about Peggy Lee, but my hope is that today you will learn maybe one or two things that you might not have known about the great Peggy Lee. The rest of the presentation I will pepper with wonderful clips of the great Peggy Lee in performance, because it's one thing to talk about Peggy Lee, but of course it's another thing to see her in performance, to let her words speak for her and you. So, to kick things off, I've got a question for you folks. How would you describe Peggy Lee? Say that somebody here does not know who Peggy Lee is. What would be the words that you would use to describe her? Great singer. Excellent. I'm sorry? Sultry. Sultry. Excellent. Peppy. Yep. Some very good words. What else? Anything else? Pretty. Definitely. You are right. Well, I'd like to continue with a section called Did You Know? Did you know that Peggy Lee was the only female singer, folks, to have 10 hits in the 1940s, 10 hits in the 1950s, and 10 hits in the 1960s? Did you know that Peggy Lee survived several life-threatening illnesses? Did you know that she was a New Age believer way before Shirley MacLaine even knew what a past life was? How about that? To that, Peggy Lee once said these words, "I don't like time. I think of everything as now." Interesting comment. I don't like time. I think of everything as now. Did you know, folks, that Peggy Lee was the only singer of her time to also achieve fame as a songwriter? Did you know that she was the only major singer of her time to be nominated for a Best Supporting Actress Oscar? Did you know that Peggy loved to read? Her favorite thing to read, get this, were complex essays by none other than Ralph Waldo Emerson. How about that? Lee claims that she got all the strength she needed to excel in her career from those essays of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Did you know, folks, that Frank Sinatra conducted the Nelson Riddle Orchestra on Peggy's album, The Man I Love? How many here knew that Frank Sinatra actually conducted bands or orchestras? There you go. That's one of the two things that you didn't know today, right? Did you know, folks, that composer and musicologist Alec Wilder once compared Peggy Lee's voice to a streetwalker you'd pass by, but if you ever stopped, you'd never leave? Kind of fits in with your sultry explanation, right? Norma Dolores Engstrom, yes, was born on May 26, 1920 in Jamestown. Anybody want to guess where Jamestown might be? North Dakota. Might you be from North Dakota? You grew up with her?
She was on the radio station.
She was on the yes, she was on the radio station. Yes, and there was a hand way in the back there. Did you want to say something? Oh, okay. You were just waving at me. Hi, good to see you. Which brings me to a question. How many here have seen Peggy Lee in performance? Great. So tell us what that was like. She saw her in Butte, Montana.
At the Finland Hotel in about the late 50s.
In the late 50s. And so what was it like? What was it like seeing her?
It was very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Good. How about over here? Did your hand go up?
Yes. I saw her twice in New York City.
Saw her twice in New York City.
And I can't remember the name of the nightclub, but I remember standing in line.
She can't remember the name of the nightclub, but she does remember standing in line.
Yes. I think our tickets were like 12 o'clock.
Tickets for the 12 o'clock show, and we're talking a.m.
Yes.
Right. Okay, yes.
And she was so wonderful. I was with a group, and we just loved her. And she kept singing after the nightclub was to close at 2 o'clock.
Let me just catch everybody up in case they can't hear. She was so wonderful, she was saying, and that she kept singing until after the nightclub was to close, so it got to be 2 a.m.
Yes, it was after 2.
It was after 2. Wonderful. And she's saying that she was wonderful, 100% correct. Folks, her father was a Norwegian railroad worker, and her mother was of Swedish origin. She was the 7th of 8 siblings. People wonder how you can survive in show business, she once said. And she went on to say, my strength came from the training I got as a girl, working as a hired hand on a farm. I shucked grain. I drove the water wagon for a threshing ring. Interesting. We people from New York City have no idea what that means. You people from North Dakota probably do. Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, folks, Norma's mother would die when she was only 4 years of age. The next number of years would prove to be the hardest for Norma Dolores, and it would be because of one person and one person only, Norma Dolores's stepmother. Norma's father remarried, and it seems that his new wife was a bit of a tyrant. And actually, very seriously, I'm putting that lightly. She really was an alleged abusive tyrant. Not only would her stepmother display verbally abusive behavior towards young Norma Dolores, she would also physically abuse her. And unfortunately, folks, on more than one occasion. The stepmother would kick her in the stomach, hit her over the head with a cast iron skillet, and if that really isn't bad enough, she would pour scalding water over Norma Dolores's hands as she would often try to do the dishes. Us New Yorkers don't mince words, do we? Yes. So, no wonder Norma Dolores would use music and singing, particularly, as an escape. The idea was also to get out of the house, and to do just that, Norma would take any job that she could. She was a waitress, a carnival spieler, a bread slicer, just to name a few. At nights, she would make up new lyrics to popular songs and listen to remote radio broadcasts from Kansas City performed by the Kansas City Coon Shouters. Anybody ever hear of the Kansas City Coon Shouters? There you go, that's number 2. That's number 2. Which happened to be, folks, a jazz band by then little-known pianist William Count Basie. That is right. We're going on 3. We're going on 3. After listening to another radio station by the call letters of KOVC in Valley City, North Dakota, Norma would end up getting her own radio show. And get this, folks, she was only 14 years old at the time. In her off time, she would file the song sheets of popular music at the time. She'd read the lyrics to each and every song on the sheet music that she was filing. This would later help her to write some unforgettable tunes that would end up defining her amazing career. That radio show was sponsored by a local restaurant, and that is how Norma Dolores was paid. She was literally paid in meals from the restaurant. Well, that's good. At least she could feed herself, you know. It was a program director at another radio station that Norma Dolores would end up working for that would decide that the name Norma Dolores Engstrom would probably not work very well if this very talented lady was going to have a career. Don't you agree? If you had that name, what would you do with it? By a show of hands, for a career, how many would keep it? By a show of hands, how many would not keep it and choose to change it? By a show of hands, how many really don't care? So that gentleman was the one who decided to call Norma Dolores Engstrom Peggy Lee. And thank God for that, actually. At the age of 17, Peggy Lee could no longer stand her abusive stepmother and decided to hop the next train to other direction. LA. That's right. We got a sharp crowd here today, you know. And get this, folks, when she did hop that train to LA, she had all of $18 in her pocket. One night, She was singing at the Doll House in Palm Springs when something occurred to her that was of major importance. And before I go on, I've got another question for you. If you had to explain, folks, Peggy Lee's singing style to someone, how would you do that? What words would you use for that? Sultry, yes. What else? The sound of it.
Lilting.
Huh?
Kind of lilting.
Lilting.
And very soft and slow.
Very soft and slow. You hit it right on the button. Very soft and slow. And here is why that's the case. It all had to do with the audience at the Doll House being way too loud one night. Peggy could not take it any longer. She couldn't think, she couldn't concentrate, she couldn't hear the band, and immediately came up with an idea that would change the way people would listen to and perceive her forever. Now, I'm sure many of you know that in a performing situation, there are two ways to get an audience quiet if you happen to be up on the stage performing. Can anybody tell me what the first way might be? Huh? Oh, put the lights out. That's a good one. Well, actually, you try to be louder than they are. Because if there's a lot of noise, then typically I think one of the first things your mind resorts to is, excuse me, folks, can I have your attention, please? Well, Peggy Lee did not want to go that route. So what did she do? Yeah, she did the opposite. She did the opposite. To get the crowd to simmer down and listen to her, instead of singing loud to try to match or be even louder than they were, Peggy sang in soft, very hushed tones. So, in a public speaking situations, here's that example. To get people to quiet down and listen, if you change the tone and volume of what you're doing, people will sort of try to hear what it is you're saying, or in her case, what it is you're singing. That's right. So, Peggy's quieting things down a bit actually forced them, this crowd, to listen to every word that she was singing. So the softer that Peggy would sing, the quieter the crowd would be. And that is exactly how Peggy Lee developed her soft and sensual style of singing a song. Her voice, really, was actually much louder and much stronger, but this new, quieter way of singing really worked for her, so she was smart enough to keep it in the act for the rest of her amazing career. It was also at this time, folks, that Peggy's amazing way with lyrics would emerge. She once said, "I draw on memories or my subconscious when I'm singing. To me, each song is like a little story." Sitting in the audience of the Doll House Club one night was the owner of a Chicago hotel called the Ambassador West. By a show of hands, is anybody here from Chicago? Used to be. Have you heard of the Ambassador West? There you go. Yes, yes. It just so happened that the Ambassador West had a famous nightclub, the Buttery Room, right? They know, they remember, they recognize, that's right. And, folks, it would be at the Buttery Room is how you say it, that Peggy Lee would make it to the big time, and you would not believe who it was with. Anybody want to venture a guess? Not an easy question. Huh? She got it. Benny Goodman. Can you read my notes from where you're sitting? Those look like powerful glasses, but I didn't realize 100% correct. Great job. Yes, it was Benny Goodman. And to that, Peggy Lee once said this: Benny's then fiancée, Lady Alice Duckworth, Interesting name, huh? Came in the Buttery Club, and she was very impressed. So the next evening, she brought Benny in because they were looking for a replacement for Helen Forrest. Forrest, that's right. And Peggy goes on to say, and I didn't know that I was it. He was looking at me strangely, and I thought that he didn't actually like me at first, but it was just that he was preoccupied with what he was hearing. So, Peggy Lee became a major part of the Benny Goodman Band in 1941 and would stay a big part of his band for the next 2 years. This was when the band, of course, was extremely popular. Peggy, though, if you had asked her about the time, and if you really knew her well, was a little nervous about all of this. All the music she sang was originally written for Helen Forrest. Helen Forrest. So, the music happened to be in Helen's key and not in Peggy's key. Add to the fact that audiences at the time came to see Helen Forrest and not Peggy Lee. Add to the fact that Benny would never, ever rehearse Peggy's numbers. She'd have to walk out on the stage and sing them cold. To this, Peggy has said these words, I was terrified. I remember how the spotlight actually reminded me of a freight train bearing down on me. I developed a psychosomatic cold because I was confused, tired, and nervous. All that had to be overcome. But you know what? It was good training. The two, Peggy Lee and Benny Goodman, were really great for one another's careers, if you think about it. The collaboration would yield Lee's first big hit. I'll start off the title, you finish it. Why don't you
Do right.
That's right. Wayne, say it louder so everybody can hear.
Do right.
That's right.
Why don't you do right?
Why don't you do right? Yes, and snapped her fingers. That's right. That tune, Why Don't You Do Right, how does that go?
Why don't you do right? Like the other men do.
Folks, don't leave your day job. But that one number actually did it. The record instantly sold over 1 million copies and made Peggy Lee a household name. In 1943, Lee would appear in 2 motion pictures with Benny Goodman. One, Stage Door, Canteen. The other, The Powers Girl. The Powers Girl. Peggy would always be grateful for the time that she spent with big bands, and she would say this, I learned more about music with the bands I worked with than I learned anywhere else. I really have no sense of time except swing time. I love that. I love that quote. It was also during this time that Lee would meet the love of her life. You might have heard her talk about it in this clip, and you certainly saw photos of it as well. His name was Dave Barber, who just happened to be the guitarist in Benny Goodman's band. There was one problem with that, though. Goodman was extremely strict about band members carrying on with a female singer, as you can probably imagine. So Lee and Barber would either have to cease and desist or leave the band. By a show of hands, how many think that they ceased and desisted? Aha! Wise group. So, it only logically follows that by show of hands, how many think that they did not cease and desist? By a show of hands, how many really don't care if they ceased and desisted? They were deeply in love, and so they both left the band. A daughter, who you saw here, named Nikki, was soon born. Now, Peggy would stay at home to care for Nicky while Dave would play the guitar in various bands. And it's not that Peggy actually became a total stay-at-home mom. Often, dinner wouldn't be close to ready when Dave would get home after a long and busy day because Peggy had spent most of it at home writing lyrics to songs that she was in the process of composing. Peggy would soon end up in the recording studios of Capitol Records and release such mega hits as I Don't Know Enough About You, It's a Good Day, You Was Right, Baby, and another one many of you might remember by the name of Mañana. Mañana. That one sold over 2 million copies and became the first Latin-sounding song to ever hit #1 on the hit charts in the USA.
Yes, it's a good day from morning till night. A good day from morning till night. A good day from morning till night.
Lee's marriage to Barber wouldn't stand the test of time. He was an alcoholic, and this placed added pressure on their marriage. So they were divorced for a couple of years, but Barber would end up conquering his alcoholism. The couple was even talking about getting remarried, but Barber, unfortunately, as soon as they decided to get remarried, would end up passing on only 4 days after they decided to get remarried. This was a tragedy that Peggy would take years to overcome. But during, the hits kept coming. 1958 would see another major hit that would forever be associated with Peggy Lee. And here's a hint. There's a lot of finger snapping in it. Fever, fever. Now, how does that one go? I'll give you another chance. Wayne's even singing. This is great. Can you give these people a round of applause, please? We have some major talent here with us today. That's right. Yes, Fever was a tune that a band actually played for Peggy one day, and she knew that she had to put her special stamp on it after hearing it. She was the one who actually added the lyrics, if you know the song well, about Romeo and Juliet and Captain Smith and Pocahontas as well. The song, needless to say, was a smash hit and climbed all the way to #8 on the charts. Another hit would soon follow that I'm sure many of you know quite well. The hit was called I'm a Woman. Whenever and whatever Peggy Lee would sing, it was clear that the song would become hers and hers alone.
What a lovely way to burn. What a lovely way to burn. What a lovely way to burn.
So if you think about it, folks, no one else would even try to record that number. Such was the uniqueness of Peggy's awesome talent. And her talent didn't only have to do with singing. Peggy was an excellent actress as well. In 1953, she would appear with a major crooner who was also an excellent actor by the initials of B.C. Bing Crosby, that's right, in a film called The Powers Girl. Then she would co-star with Danny Thomas in a movie by the name of, anybody remember? The Jazz Singer. The Jazz Singer, yes. A wonderful song from that film would be a major hit for Lee. It's called Lover. Soon after that, Lee would end up being nominated for an Academy Award for her portrayal of an alcoholic blues singer in a movie called Pete Kelly's Blues. It seemed as if Peggy could do it all. Anything she touched would turn to gold. If Peggy wasn't appearing in motion pictures, then she was writing music for them. In 1955, Disney asked Peggy not only to supply voices for a full-feature cartoon that they were making called Lady and the Tramp, but to write songs for that picture as well. She was paid $3,500 for her efforts at the time. Many years later, in the 1980s, the film would come out in VHS video format, and consumers all around the world bought copies of The Lady and the Tramp as if there was no tomorrow. In fact, get this, folks, Disney would make no less than $90 million off the sale of the video of that wonderful film. How do you think Peggy Lee felt about that? Let's just say that she was slightly miffed that Disney was making all those millions and she was not getting a penny of that because she was paid $3,500 way back when the film was made in the 50s. So she sued Disney and she won. Peggy Lee was awarded no less than $2.3 million based on that suit. Lee says it was more of a moral victory, actually, than a financial one. By the time the lawyers got through, and then the IRS, she went on to say there was nothing left. Whether it was on the nightclub stage, the silver screen, the TV screen, or in the recording studio, Peggy Lee was now a bona fide star. Some people actually believe that she was the greatest jazz singer ever. Whatever you choose to believe, after many long and hard years, Peggy Lee, folks, had made it. She was in control of her career, and as each year passed, Peggy would soar to even higher and more exalted heights. Not so for her personal life. She would end up being married a total of 4 times. None of those marriages, unfortunately, ended up working out for one reason or another. Maybe that's because Peggy Lee was actually married to one thing and one thing only, and of course, that was her career. But it was for all the right reasons, and her millions of fans, many of which are here today, absolutely loved her and still love her for those years of dedication. It was also clear that she loved her fans in return. Peggy Lee has one child, a daughter named Nikki, who you saw here not too long ago on the screen from her marriage to Dave Barber. Lee's amazing 50-year career came to a sad end on January 21st, 2002. She was 81 years of age. In that amazing amount of time, she had made no less than 1,050 recordings. Think about that for a moment. 1,050 recordings. She also sold no less than a grand total of 20 million recordings, made more money than Mickey Mantle. So, who and what was Peggy Lee? Well, she was 5 feet 7 inches tall, had hazel eyes, and naturally blonde hair. She was a perfectionist. She cared deeply about all facets of her career. She would spend countless hours selecting songs, working with the right arrangers and orchestras to carefully create her sound. Every hand gesture, Every movement that she made on stage, while it may have looked natural, was very carefully planned and choreographed. Strange when you think of how effortless and spontaneous it looks from the audience. Few people know that Peggy Lee was also a talented artist. Now, I'm not talking about singing or acting. She would paint and she would sculpt. Peggy loved to sculpt the hands of famous people, people that she would meet, such as Albert Schweitzer. She was well-read, and she was incredibly intelligent. She also supported numerous charities. Here are some words that a music critic once wrote. She wasn't one of our girls, like Rosemary Clooney or Dinah Shore or Patti Page or Doris Day. There was more richness to her, more complexity, more undercurrents that couldn't quite be controlled. Ella, of course, was widely held to rule the pop jazz roost, but she was never quite able to bring a true broken heart ballad to the depths of the soul that Peggy could. She wasn't Billie or Sarah or Anita, all of them brilliant in some ways, but limited actually in others. She had some of all of those in her, but she was a great deal more. She was singular. No one occupied Peggy Lee's place because only one woman could. Platinum pretty, but beholden to one. Perky and bouncy, but genuinely soulful and world-weary and resigned. Peggy Lee was also a trooper. The show must go on was one of her many mottos. Why would you think so? Just listen to this, folks. In 1987, Peggy accidentally slipped on a steel plate while she was doing a show at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. She broke her pelvis on stage in front of that audience that night, as well as several bones. Other entertainers, if you think about it, would have stopped the show right then and there and would make an immediate beeline for the hospital. But not Peggy Lee. She gathered her wits about her and all at once called for a chair to be brought out on the stage, sat on one hip, and finished the remaining parts of the show. I believe that various events in Peggy Lee's life would cause her to search for something deeper, something to help explain what life was really all about. I also believe that Lee knew much more than she was letting on. There seemed to be a deep side to her, an aware side that knew that life was much more than the frivolity that Hollywood dishes out in heaping amounts. You could get a strong sense of this when you would see her perform. I would like to close today, folks, by saying that a reporter once asked Peggy Lee late in her life if she had an innate need to sing. To that, she responded with the following words: "I was born feeling that way. When I was just a small child, I sang all the time." I think Peggy Lee was in there from the start, she said. It's a credit to Norma Dolores Engstrom that she knew all along that Peggy Lee was in there from the start. If you really think about it, that's probably what saved her during her very complicated and sad childhood. I've chosen a wonderful song for you to close with in clip form. It's appropriately called Here's to You.
Your health, my friend, and here's to you. Chin chin, my friend, and lean skull too.
Question: By show of hands, how many did learn at least 2 things this afternoon that they might not have known prior about the great Peggy Lee? Wonderful. Mission accomplished. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.